It perched on the branch outside my window and said my name. I remember that first sentence like a bruise, raw, impossible to unhear. I came to this town thinking I would study wing beats and call response patterns, not folklore. I had my notebook, my recorder, a cheap thermos of coffee that tasted of metal, and a stubborn belief that science could explain anything that hooted after dark. The town smelled of damp wood and winter straw. The only lights were porch bulbs that guttered like failing blinks. People kept their curtains drawn. They smiled at me with the cautious politeness of people used to looking away. The farm I rented was small, one room and a loft, wrapped in the kind of silence that presses on your ears. Nights were colder than I expected. Breath hung like a confession. I sleep in layers, with the recorder on the bedside table, because I wanted to catch the usual, distant fox calls, the slap of wings. Instead, I caught the sound that seems to belong to no ledger of nature, a half shriek, half whisper, a throat trying to be both a bird and a voice. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind or a neighbor's prank. It is easier to explain a thing away when you are already tired. The first signs were small and stupidly plausible. A scattering of strange feathers on the path to the shed, feathers paler than any local species. A thrush found on the lawn with its beak forced open, as if frozen mid-cry. My dog, Leo, a skinny mutt who had been following me since I arrived, stopped eating and fixed his attention on a single tree for hours, eyes reflecting moonlight like coin. He would not sleep when that tree was in view. I began keeping notes the way I always do. Exact times, weather, the soft arithmetic of hours. At 0:03 on the third night, there was a scratching at the window. So light, I thought I might have imagined it. When I pushed the blinds aside, I saw nothing but a shadow, a rounded silhouette perched on the outer branch, and the impression of a face facing me. It was the wrong kind of face. It had the compact, rounded body of an owl, all ragged feathers and damp, but where an owl's disc should have been there was a horizontal seam that opened, and inside it 2 rows of teeth. I laughed at myself in the dark. Laughter is a reflex when your brain offers you the luxury of denial. I told myself to record everything, to stay awake long enough to collect data. Instead, I pressed record and left the window cracked. The night pressed back, and then the sound came again. Not a call, but a phrase, shaped like a mouth forming syllables. It wasn't my name that first night, only a mimicry of sound. But in the playback, layered under the wind, I could hear something that unsettled the membrane between curiosity and terror. The recording repeated a syllable that matched the way my mother says my name. I thought recording would keep me honest. I thought that if I could hold a clear copy of whatever this was, I could prove it to myself and to anyone who still believed in evidence instead of superstition. That was arrogance, the kind that smells like stale coffee and late-night certainty. The next week folded into a pattern of approaching noise and retreat. The creature learned the cadence of the house. It waited until the lights were low, until the radiators sighed, and the world smelled of boiled socks and dust. It did not always sing. Sometimes it scratched, thin and patient, like fingernails tracing the grain of wood. Sometimes it only watched. Leo would stand motionless at the foot of the bed, hackles up, his breath a slow steam in the cold. When I tried to film it from the porch with my infrared cam, the screen showed static for most of the clip. Then, for a single second, a shape too close to the lens, a broad, feathered flank, and the flash of teeth moving as if chewing on sound itself. The file corrupted after that. When I recovered the footage, the second-long frame played back stretched and warped, and under the static, a voice said unmistakably, "Daddy?" I stopped sleeping. Between episodes, I would drift into dreams that matched reality too well. A branch tapping at the window, a wet smile bent toward me. Waking felt like surfacing from a deep place and finding my pockets lined with feathers. I began to misplace hours. A notebook entry would show scribbles in my own handwriting I did not remember writing. Desperate lines like, "Do not answer," and "It says your mother," scrawled across a page dated 2 days earlier. Either I was losing time or something was writing for me. People in town tightened when I asked. The hardware man clucked and said, "You don't want to go out at night, son." The woman at the diner lowered her voice and told me about a girl who walked out into the corn and came back the next morning humming a lullaby she had never known. Her eyes were washed out, like someone had left a light on inside her skull. "She answered it," the woman whispered. "She answered the voice." No one said the official word, missing, out loud. They used smaller nouns, as if that could clip its wings. Then the calls began on my phone. No number, no sound on the other end but a breath. Once, a message, a voicemail of me, recorded in my own voice, calling to the porch. "It's open, come out." I received it at 23:57. I must have been in the kitchen. I have a time-stamped photo on my camera showing me there. I have a second camera set to watch the entryway. The footage from 23:58 shows only the empty porch, the swing moving in no wind, and then a pause, a frame where the air seems to dent inward, like a breath taken from the wrong direction. There is a faint smear on the lens that looks in a way that makes the back of my neck tingle, like the imprint of a smile. The animal learns, the animal copies, the animal practices voices. Tonight, as I write this in the dim of the lantern, it called me from the tree in the yard, mimicking a laugh I used to share with a friend who died in college. The laugh was theirs, the exact rhythm, the exact breath. It ended in my name. Then, so close I could have sworn it came from inside my chest, the recorder on the table clicked and played a line that was not there a moment before. It was my voice, calm and coaxing, saying, "Come outside, it's just us." Midnight has a way of rearranging everything you thought you knew about distance. Sound narrows into a tunnel, shadows fold their edges and press close enough to read. I set the recorder on the table with the slow, deliberate care of someone making a last will. The battery light blinked green, a tiny, stupid comfort. I locked the deadbolt, latched the chain, wedged the chair under the knob, rituals that felt like armor. Outside, the world breathed in long, cold pulls. The radiator sighed. Leo lay at my feet, a warm weight of worry and fur. He whined once and then stopped, as if listening. At 23:58, the phone hummed with a message, a voicemail of my mother, humming a lullaby she used to hum when I was small. I kept my hands away from the screen. My mouth tasted of iron. I pressed my palm flat against the recorder and began to speak, because speaking into a device felt less fatal than speaking into the air. I said names, dates, stupid facts that would prove I was myself. I told whoever might find this what happened, in case I did something wrong and someone needed to know I tried. My voice cracked 3 times. The house answered with silence that had teeth. At 23:59, the thing began. It did not call from the yard this time. It called from the chimney, from the pipe, from the small hollow between my ribs. It imitated a dozen voices at once, a neighbor's cough, a child's murmur, a friend's cruel joke. Between the impressions, it placed its own voice, a wet, papery sound that slid between words like a tongue. It said, in a voice that was so close I could have kissed it, "Open." I stood. I wrapped my jacket around my hands and felt the zipper bite when I pulled it. Leo nudged my ankle and then pressed his head against my shin, an accusation. The chain on the door felt like a promise. I undid it with a hand that did not tremble until the latch slid. The porch light threw a pale circle on warped boards. The night seemed to hold its breath. There it was, perched on the rail, impossibly still. Feathers clumped with the night, a body the size of a gull, and that mouth, 2 rows of teeth cramped where a beak should have been. Its eyes were small pits, and when it leaned forward, the teeth parted and made a sound like someone clearing their throat before a confession. Then, with a sound that matched a memory I didn't want to own, it said my name the way my father used to, all patience and obligation. For a second, I thought of the science I had trusted, the neat charts and annotations. For a second, I thought about running. For a second, I thought about Leo and how he had been watching that tree for days. I opened the door. The recorder on the table kept recording. Later, if later exists, the file will show a clean stretch of static and then, impossibly, my own voice coaxing a stranger, "It's open, come out." Only after that will it play a different clip, layered beneath my words, a new voice learning the cadence of me, a grin made of teeth and sound, rehearsing lines I had never meant to say. The last thing the file keeps is not the slam of a door or the cut of a scream, but the hush that follows a teaching, patient, hungry, practiced. I left the recorder running. I answered.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.